Hey, I'm Daniel, and on this episode of the Filmcraziest Show, I was joined by Alexandra Engelson, who is a costume designer, producer, and writer, and a person of many hats. We spoke about some of her projects, like the short film Leylak, which recently premiered at Tribeca, as well as ShockDocs, The Devil Made Me Do It, where she was the costume designer on both of those projects. We talk a lot about her other projects and what got her into costume design as well, and a conversation with a lot of variety. So here's Alexandra to introduce the show.
Hi, my name is Alexandra Engelson. I'm a multi-hyphenate filmmaker, costume designer, producer, and writer, and you're watching the Filmcraziest Show.
Cool. I love that little intro. So we're talking about a lot of your projects today, including Leylak, a bit of the ShockDocs, The Devil Made Me Do It, and then a bunch of other stuff. So
yes, I tend to have my fingers in a lot of different places and in a lot of different pots being stirred.
Yeah, you mentioned before the interview that you always have like different hats on. So
yes,
we'll have to
exactly.
play with all of those.
You never know what hat you're getting when you're talking with me. Either it could be a costume design hat, writer hat, or a producing hat.
Now, I'd love to start with just a general one before we actually get into the projects. I'd love to hear
absolutely.
about how you started in costume design.
So I actually started in costume design in high school. I had designed 14 productions by the time I had graduated high school, and not just you reach out to someone and they send you a bunch of clothing. By the time I was a junior, it was clear that I had a passion for it. So I had mentors in high school who helped me figure out exactly what each character would wear, how we would design it, how we would build it, and where we would source it. And then in college, I was a theater major, both costume and performance, and I actually ran away from the major. And I said I never wanted to do costumes again. I never wanted to be a theater major again. I couldn't do it. I wanted to be a freer spirit and be able to explore being in a sorority and joining extracurriculars and just the many different facets. So I ended up being a public relations major. And I did not love that. It was not for me. I love public speaking and I love talking with people, but public relations itself was not something I really wanted to do. After having a few internships and working in it. So I graduated college and I worked for a lawyer who I had been working for 3 summers beforehand and worked for him for another 2 years. And he only closed up shop when I said to him I was leaving his practice. And so working for the lawyer actually gave me the incredible tools I have today as a producer to read contracts and understand legal jargon and understand legal language and understand clearances and everything that goes along with cast deals and constitutions for production companies. Basically, I love making contracts now and love reading them and love finding places that don't make sense. So after that, I went and actually worked for Magilla Entertainment as a travel coordinator for Beachfront Bargain Hunt, Lakefront Bargain Hunt, Beachfront Bargain Hunt renovation, and Lakefront Bargain Hunt renovation. And I worked there for about 1.5 years. And then the corporate world stole me for a little bit. And I was a corporate event planner for a minute and got to travel, which was amazing, but I realized it's not where my heart was. So I reached out to the costume coordinator of Quantico about 6 times before he actually responded. And interestingly enough, he's one of my closest friends now. And then I became a costume PA. And the only reason I was able to do it was because of the experience I had in college and in high school, because I understood clothing, I understood the world of costumes, I understood costume design. And ever since then, I've costume coordinated, I've costume PA'd, I've costume designed, I've shopped, and I've done clearances as well and travel coordinating for scripted, television and film, kind of done a plethora of things. I've also written and produced. I don't believe in pigeonholing yourself.
Great, that's quite the journey.
Yes.
Now, clearance. You said you're a clearance coordinator. I read that you're one on Almost Family. So that's just with projects and stuff.
So being a clearance coordinator is a really unique position. You have to understand production. You have to understand the creative heads, so costumes, art, set dressing. And you also need to truly understand legal contracts and research. And so basically with a clearance coordinator, any piece of art, any pattern on a clothing, any logo, any name, any location, any address, any phone number, all of that has to get filtered through the clearance coordinator, who not only organizes it, but does the research to see if it's something that can be used on screen, and then also forward it to the legal department, and also work with product placement and networks and studios. So basically the piece of art behind you, the beautiful beach, I'd have to find the photographer. And then if there was a person in it, I would have to get a contract for the person in it as well as the photographer. So it's a lot of research, a lot of understanding the creatives, and a lot of understanding legal.
Okay, that's pretty cool, actually.
It is a really cool job. I am one of the few people who actually really likes it.
Yeah, like I feel like I like data entry, so like that seems like something that's like very meticulous, right?
It is. And it's really interesting because I get to work with all departments, from the directors, the producers, the DP, which is the director of photography, to costumes, to art, to set dressing, to legal, and to business affairs. And it really is just, you get to meet so many interesting people and learn every aspect of production.
Cool. I'd love to ask just, so what's the difference between a costume coordinator and a costume designer?
So a costume coordinator is kind of the nucleus of a department. My job ranges in one day to helping the designer shop. I manage the budget, I track the budget, I manage the team of PA production assistants, I manage the office, I manage the logistics between costumes and production, costumes and art, costumes, and anybody who needs to talk to the costume department usually comes to me or goes to the designer, who loops me in to keep track of our schedule. It kind of is just the logistical head of the costume department.
Okay, so you're kind
And
of...
a costume designer, it's her vision or his vision or their vision as to what the show looks like, what the actors are wearing, what's the tone of the show, what's the process, versus I'm more, as a costume coordinator, also the logistical head. I love doing both. I'm in the union as a designer, but I also love costume coordinating because it's such an interesting facet, kind of like clearance coordinating. It's producing for the costume department.
Okay, so that's kind of putting all your hats on in one, with the producer and costume designer.
Exactly.
Okay, cool. So we'll get right into, sorry, it's Leylak?
Leylak.
I'll get it one time.
Not a problem at all.
So when costuming that short, do you want to just tell people about the short film first?
Absolutely. So Leylak is a short film that takes place during the middle of COVID, the middle of the pandemic last year, and it's about the loss of a family member and how painful that was, and the relationship of a father and a daughter, and how sometimes it's the child who takes care of the father.
Okay, cool. Now, what was it like filming during the pandemic?
It was hard and really interesting and challenging, and definitely different. It was the first job I had back after the pandemic. And first of all, it was the middle of summer, so it was very hot. Wearing masks and during that time period, obviously all of us know, not fun to wear a mask in the heat. We filmed outside upstate New York, which did help with the COVID experience because we were able to be more 6 feet apart. We were able to truly take off our mask and have lunch separately when we needed to, and have water. I definitely think from a costume standpoint, it was most challenging sourcing the masks because we're filming in the middle of a pandemic when masks are basically the highest commodity. We filmed last year in July, and that was definitely the hardest part from my department.
Okay, so that was definitely one of my questions. So you were able to like pick out the masks, kind of?
Oh, absolutely. The mask portion of Leylak, it's all about storytelling. So as I always say, costumes is another form of storytelling, and it's kind of how I became a writer, because I understand the psychology and the characters enough to create a world with them. But in Leylak specifically, the masks told an entire story. We really wanted to showcase that the people who would be working in a cemetery and who did work in the cemetery during the pandemic, they were the ones who had to work. They were the immigrants, the lower income people who didn't have the option to work remotely. And that's typically how it happens. It's the immigrants who take the jobs that are hard and physical labor and emotionally take a toll. And we really wanted to showcase that this was something that wasn't an option. And Yusef in Leylak feels the guilt that he brought COVID into his house because he had to work to support his family. And so in the beginning of Leylak, you have Yusef and Samrat. They're friends, they're working in the grave together, the gravesite together, and they're both wearing just plain surgical masks, workman's gloves, and they're not wearing KN95s because at that time in July, or when it was supposed to be, which was April, it was not available. They were not only given to management and the people directly in the morgue, which is why fast forward about 3 minutes when you have the men in the white suits. They're wearing long blue gloves and KN95s. And they're wearing that because they're coming directly from the morgue. Okay. And then you see the manager, who is not the lowest on the totem pole as far as the hierarchy in work, who's not necessarily an immigrant. And he's dressed in a suit with a KN95. And he doesn't have to touch anything or be near anyone. And we really spent time, specifically myself, the directors, and the writer, how can we showcase the class difference just by using masks? The other side of it is, in one scene, Yusef is in his bedroom, and he's smelling his wife's cardigan. And right next to that is a sewing machine. And I spoke to the writer, who's also Turkish, and I said, would it be normal in a Turkish household for someone to sew? And he goes, absolutely. And I said, well, let's put a sewing machine in and have it as though the wife had made their masks, their fabric masks, out of old clothing. So what I did is I went on Etsy and I found Turkish designers from Istanbul and from the US. And I said, who has masks? Who has this? Who has that? And Yusef's gray pleated mask is actually from a Turkish designer and handmade. And when I bought it, I had embroidered it with his initials, something his wife would have done in the actual film. And then the daughters would have been made out of an old PJ shirt. So those are kind of the masks telling their own story.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, I was gonna say I love the ranks mask. So that's yes. Cool that it's from the pajamas.
And it's also important to me as the designer that while I may be a Caucasian woman, that if I'm representing other cultures on the screen, that I use the resources that I have from those communities, that I support them. So a lot of the clothing and a lot of the masks specifically, and some of the clothes and the orange cardigan, all are Turkish designers, because it's important to be able to give back to them as well.
Cool. That's awesome. What was it like designing the uniforms for the gravediggers?
I did a lot of research and figured out what New York color schemes there really are. And it was grays and blues and greens of all shades. And I said to the directors and the writer, and I said, well, green is a very prominent color. It can mean hope in some cases, and it can also mean somberness in others. I think we should go with what it's called forest green. And I searched for about a week, trying to find the best pricing on a low budget short film, trying to truly figure out what would they be wearing? Who would be wearing open shirts? Who would be wearing a hat? What kind of hat? So we have a mix of I call them fisherman hats. They're the wide brimmed with like the chin strap. And then we have baseball caps. And then every single one of them, when they came to me, they were dressed on set, I would take this bucket of mud I had, and I would just start putting my hands all over their costume to get it really soaked in. And then once they got into each hole in the graveyard, it was into the cemetery, it was just dirt everywhere. And it worked perfectly because they would have been working all day. And it's really, I think that's the most interesting visual I've ever had to create, is creating a unified, uniform cemetery worker, but everyone's still having unique pieces of the way they would wear it. Some people had bandanas sticking out of their pockets, others had them under their caps. It really had to be specific to each character and actor.
That the attention to detail is awesome. You don't really
No, you don't. And I think
goes into it.
Exactly. And to me, the process and the details and the storytelling is just, it's so interesting.
Cool. Now, just ripping kind of from your bio, you say that you like to tell stories with your costumes, like in the psychology of it. Can you tell me about that?
So, as I had mentioned, the psychology behind a character is not just here's a bunch of clothing, I'm going to wear it. What are they feeling? What are they going through in that moment? Where are they heading? Who have they recently interacted with? How much money do they have? Are they of a higher class but dressed as a lower class? Are they someone who doesn't have any money and somehow finds lots of money for fake products or glamorous clothing? So it really is about understanding the script and rereading it. I think I usually read a script once over to read the script. The third time I read the script, I break it down. And by the fifth time, I start to analyze the characters. So I really read a script from top to bottom a lot, as most creative heads do. But the psychology behind characters, I'm not a stylist. I'm a costume designer. I am telling a story with someone's clothing. I am telling a story that embraces and enhances their life and enhances their story. And they say if you're doing your job right as a costume designer, most people won't notice those little details consciously, like the bandana, but they will notice them as far as how it makes them feel. So if I had chosen bright orange in Leylak as the uniforms, that would have been very different than the dark somber green I chose. That's kind of what I meant by psychology of character.
Okay, cool. Now, yeah, like even as I'm watching the short, like focusing on like the costumes, like I can't like respect fully what you do almost, because it's like like this seems not easy, but I guess just like like this just seems like you put so many layers in it that you can't see at surface level.
Absolutely. And the more layers, the more complex a character is. The best example I can give of psychology of characters is, I'm guessing, have you seen Game of Thrones?
Yeah.
So in the first season, Sansa Stark is a little dove. She wears lilac and flowy sleeves and puts her hair in the way of Queen Cersei. And she wears lower cut dresses and corsets. And it just feels light, flowy, and princess-like. By the middle, she's disheveled, she's been abused, and her clothing starts to get darker and more structured and more like armor. So that by the time she becomes Queen of the North, and I hope I'm not spoiling it for anyone out there, she has wearing high necklines and armor to protect herself internally as well as from the outside world. And that's really the best way I can describe psychology of character in clothing. Those clothes tell a story.
Cool. Now, with your writer's hat, does that like really help in that aspect with your costume design?
Absolutely. So Joint Venture is one of the projects I'm currently working on. It was originally workshopped with Marta Kaufman, the creator of Friends. And I am in a writer's room. We're kind of doing it backwards. Usually a writer's room takes place after someone has sold a pilot. But we started the pilot together, 7 of us, 85% female and of all age ranges. And when I'm writing a visual scene, they're always like, oh, we always can tell you're such a costume designer because you can clearly see that someone's wearing sequin bell bottoms and the other person is dressed in a cardigan and jeans. And I was like, it's painting the picture. And that's, it does, I think it really helps because I can build really strong characters because I've been doing that with clothing for years.
Okay, that's awesome. Now,
in fact, actually, Traveling Saleswoman, my other pilot, it was actually created based off of a dress. I was sitting in my costume stock and found this 1940s dress. I don't have it with me, but I can send you a photo if you'd like. And I said, who would wear this? Who is this woman? And it turns out it was a widow who, not actually, but in my mind, she is a widow whose husband was murdered. And she becomes a traveling saleswoman to find out who his murderer is and to also make ends meet in the 40s. So I really do think that being a costume designer has given me the skill set to be a writer and build these worlds.
Cool. Now, going to ShockDocs, the Devil Made Me Do It. Now, as I said before, I wasn't able to watch it just because I'm in Canada, so we don't have Discovery Plus here for some reason. But
you will soon.
Okay. Now, dressing a documentary, what's the difference between like dressing a documentary and dressing a film or like a short film?
So with ShockDocs, I actually didn't do the interviewed people. When you watch it, you'll see the real people such as Debbie and Alan and all of the actual people who are involved in it. Part of doing a docudrama is that there's a recreation. When someone is describing what happened, you'd get a flashback. And unfortunately, not everyone had an iPhone back in the 80s. So we create the world, we recreate the world so everyone can get the visual of what happened. It was different and similar. We got a script, we knew casting, we were able to kind of delve in. And a lot of it was, I thought it was really cool and interesting because it's real people. So not only was I matching a time frame, I had to match what these people, not characters, but these people would have worn. So Lorraine Warren has a very specific style. She is very much known for her high-collared Victorian-esque outfits. And to match that and match her interviews was a challenge in and of itself, because I had to make sure that people and actors who were the recreation were just as beautifully dressed or ugly dressed or fancy dressed or sassily dressed as the actual people were during the court case and beforehand. And it was really interesting, but I think really rewarding. And I learned a whole new side, and I got to do the 80s, which is, I always think is fun, 1980. And so it's not like the glamour Madonna 80s, but it's definitely a more laid back, casual end of 70s, early 80s vibe. And I think it was really, really interesting. And it was only different in the sense that there was no speaking that I was working with. So I didn't have to worry about sound or if an outfit made too much noise or can this be seen on camera? Because it can all be seen on camera as long as it's not heard.
Is that a challenge in itself, like dressing for scenes that don't have any like dialogue at the time?
It is, because you don't always know what's, yeah, exactly.
Sorry.
You don't always know what's happening. I apologize. I talk a lot. You don't always know what's happening. I do. I'm a New Yorker. We all talk a lot. With something where there's no dialogue, you don't always know what's about to happen. So continuity is definitely the hardest challenge. And continuity is really making sure that for script day one, someone's wearing one outfit and not the same outfit when we cut to her arm later on, and it's a different moment. And it's just making sure that the world we're showing is as realistic and continuous as possible.
Okay. And I bet you didn't, like 5 years ago, if you would have been like, oh, hey, you're going to be dressing for kind of Lorraine Warren, you probably would have been surprised, right?
Yes and no. 5 years ago, I probably would have said, okay, that makes sense. If you had said you're going to be a writer and a producer, I would have said, you're crazy. I've always been interested in clothing and costumes, even when I was about 6 or 7. So costume design does not surprise me that I was doing something like that. I love doing outside of the box jobs. It would, if you had said I would be a writer and producer, I'd be like, what are you talking about?
Okay. Staying on kind of the writer hat for
yes.
a little bit. Can you tell me about the Domino Writing Challenge that you've created?
Absolutely. About 3 years ago, almost 4. 2020 was such a blur. About 3.5 years ago, I was informed and educated by a mentor on Almost Family, who was pretty high up in the hierarchy. And he said, I got my career by being an assistant and by writing. And he encouraged me to write. So I did. And then I realized that I truly love collaboration. It's the only way to make art. Truly, like at its purest form, TV and film is a collaborative art. And I said, wouldn't it be interesting if all of these women who don't normally have a voice had the ability, without any risk, without any judgment, to write? And I created the Domino Writing Challenge, where if you are a woman, a non-binary person, person of color, deaf, blind, it doesn't matter. If you have no writing experience or if you are the writer on Blacklist, you can join. And it is a safe space for anyone to just write. So you get 3 to 4 days. Sorry, you have 2 days to write at least 4 pages. And if you can't write 4 pages in 2 days, that's fine. You'll just go to the end, add your name back to the list, and we'll keep going until we have a full script. And at this point, we have 3 full scripts, and we have the ability to say we're all writers. And it's super empowering. I met one of my closest friends through it. And just, it's such a great opportunity for those to express their voice without any fear of anything, because it's a judgment-free zone. No one can change your words. What it is you have 4 days to write. Sorry, it's changed a couple times. You have 4 pages to write in 2 days. And going forward, it's like the game of telephone. If I write the dog is black, the next person who writes it can't say the dog is yellow. They can say the dog's friend is yellow, and you have to just continue the story. And so the more the story continues, the weirder it gets. Our current script is a holiday challenge script, and it is a horror Christmas film. And it is really scary, to the point where I was reading it one day and just had to put it down because I was terrified. And it's so brilliant because it's 16 different minds.
That's awesome. Now, like, how many countries are the people from?
Just US at the moment, but anybody can join.
Okay, cool. That's a great idea. I like it a lot.
Thank you.
So are there any colors that you work specifically with, or that you enjoy working most with?
Me as a person, I love color. I do not shy away from it. Yellow is my favorite color to wear as a person. I don't think any color is challenging. I also don't think any body type is challenging. I think that every body type is a canvas to be painted with clothing, and no color scares me. I hate to say it like that because it's just true. Like, the more color, the better for me as a designer and as a person.
Okay.
Of course, it depends on the show. If you're going to give me something like Handmaid's Tale, you really only want the red cape to be red. You don't want everything to be red. It really is. It's like looking at a painting and seeing what sections have to be what color.
Okay. It's kind of specific to the tone of the story, like you said.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yes.
All right.
Not that I've worked on Handmaid's Tale. Just an example.
No, for sure. Or that you've worked on Game of Thrones. I get you.
Exactly.
Now, I'd love to ask, what's the most interesting costume that you've had to design, or wardrobe, I suppose?
The most interesting costume I've designed would probably be a short film I did that took place in the future. It was called Osiris. It has not premiered yet, unfortunately. But I had to find a whole new world in a futuristic hospital. And the nurse was a robot. So I had to find a dress or an outfit that told the story of her being a robot that felt trapped as a robot and as a cyborg and as a woman and still a person and still a nurse. So surprisingly, I went to Beacon's Closet in New York City and found a dress. White, it has this futuristic 80s high collar vibe. And then I said, well, I'm going to need 2 of them because there are 2 nurses. And lo and behold, that same day, at that same moment, across the store, because Beacon's is a thrift store, so you don't really have the ability to usually find 2 of the same thing, I found the second dress in the exact size I needed. And I based the entire film off of these 2 dresses, and everything else just fell into place. I reached out to designers from all across the country through Etsy, through research, and just found things that weren't like the typical futuristic, weren't Hunger Game-esque, weren't dystopian, weren't Back to the Future. And in my mind, it was just creating this world that was incredible. But the cyborg was definitely the challenging outfit, costume.
Okay, that's awesome. Now, my last one, is there a specific type of project for costume design that you wanted to do, like that's on your bucket list?
My own. I would love to design for when my pilot goes into production, because I think that bringing my characters to life through clothing would be an absolute honor and dream. The characters I write to also be brought through clothing.
Okay. So that's the dream, being a writer and costume designer on the projects?
Exactly. Some people want to be writers and directors. I want to be a writer and a costume designer and producer.
I feel like that's a unique triple threat to
It
do
is.
on a project.
It really is. And it's, with Traveling Saleswoman, we're currently producing our, excuse me, our proof of concept.
Okay.
And my casting director all the time is like, I'm so glad you're not directing also, because you just have so many hats already. And I'm like, I really don't want to direct. I want whoever's a director to do their thing. I think everyone has a job, and that's, we all know what we want to do and what we all do best.
Yeah, and if you did add the directing hat, you don't want to be overwhelmed, right?
Exactly. You don't want to wear too many hats on one project.
Okay.
Perfect. Unless you're the actress and then the costume designer says, you're going to wear 20 hats.
I like that's kind of like a pun.
Exactly.
I like it.
As a costume designer, I say, don't wear too many hats.
I love the irony.
Me too.
Now, before we go, do you have anything you want to plug? I know we've talked about so many projects, but if there's anything that's upcoming or that you really like to talk about.
Yes, I just want to say that people are going to tell you who you need to be and what you need to do to get there. And I truly believe, and am a great example, that you don't need to do that. That storytelling is not just writing. It's not just directing. If you have a passion in any other topic, whether it is through furniture or it is through camera or lighting or clothing, you're a storyteller. And all you need to do is take that first step, because I found my voice through clothing and through writing. And I really believe that storytelling happens in all shapes and sizes and all mediums.
Cool. I love ending.
Not so much a shameless plug, but
no, that's a great like token of wisdom to end on. Yeah, because like look at where you've gone, where your journey was, and going to PR, and then now costume has found you again.
It has, and pushed me into writing, and who knows what's next.
Awesome. Cool. So I'll end it there. So Alexandra Engelson, costume designer for Leylak, ShockDocs, and writer, everything in between. Thank you for chatting with me on the Filmcraziest Show.
Thank you so much, Daniel.